The morning air at Fort Adwell felt thick enough to drink, that humid blanket of summer heat clinging to everything, making your uniform stick before you'd even started moving. It was the kind of air that reminded you why they called Georgia the armpit of the South. The sun was already climbing over the pine trees, casting long shadows across the motor pool where a steady stream of soldiers headed to morning formation. PT groups jogged past in formation, their cadence calls echoing off the concrete buildings like a drumbeat that never quite faded. Fort Adwell had been home to the 3rd Infantry Division for decades, and it showed in every weathered building and faded sign. Everything was built to last and painted that particular shade of army beige that somehow managed to look both official and depressing at the same time. The main road was lined with those regulation signs that told you exactly how fast you could drive and exactly how much trouble you'd be in if you didn't listen. The base had that Monday morning energy every soldier recognized. Weekend liberty was over, real work was about to begin, and nobody was particularly happy about it. Diesel engines coughed to life in the motor pool, NCOs barked instructions that carried on the humid air. The smell of JP8 fuel mixed with Georgia pine and the ever-present aroma of industrial-strength coffee from the chow hall. In short, it was just another day at just another army base where routine was religion, and anything out of the ordinary got noticed fast. Nobody paid attention to the woman stepping out of the beat-up Ford Ranger at the depot entrance. Lena Trujillo moved like she'd been walking on military bases her whole life. 52 years old, grey threading through dark hair pulled back in the kind of tight bun that said regulation was still a habit, even after retirement. Her shoulders stayed straight despite the slight hitch in her right step, a reminder of that night outside Mosul when the ground had come up too fast and too hard. She'd been out of the army for 8 years now, but it never really left her. The way she scanned exits when entering a room, how she still woke up at 0500 without an alarm, the fact that her civilian clothes were organized in her closet with military precision even though no one would ever inspect them. The scar on her neck was barely visible above her collar, just a thin white line where shrapnel had kissed skin and moved on. Most people never noticed it, the ones who did usually knew better than to ask. There were other scars, of course. The puckered skin on her left forearm where an IED fragment had carved out a chunk of muscle, the surgical scar on her knee from when a helicopter landing had gone wrong, the invisible ones that therapy helped but never quite healed. But it was her jacket that caught the stares. Faded green that had seen too many deployments, sleeves frayed at the cuffs like they'd been through a washing machine war. The fabric was that particular shade of sun bleach that only came from months under desert sun, from sand that got into everything and washing machines that ran on generator power. The shoulder seam hung by threads that should have given up years ago, but it somehow kept holding on, through pride or stubbornness. The unit patch on her left arm was so sun-bleached you could barely make out what it used to be, just ghost shadows of thread and fabric. If you looked closely, you might see the faint outline of something that looked almost like wings, or maybe claws, or maybe nothing at all, the kind of patch that wasn't in any regulation manual. Around her neck hung one of those old-school ID lanyards from the early 2000s, the plastic badge inside yellowed with age and bent at the corners, the kind they stopped issuing when everything went digital and everyone started carrying CACs instead of paper orders. She wasn't trying to make a statement. This was just what she'd grabbed from the closet to help with the weekend training exercise. The email had been simple enough. Civilian volunteer needed, experience with military logistics preferred, no pay but meals provided. She'd responded because she was between contractor jobs and because sitting in her apartment was driving her crazy. Civilian volunteer, no rank, no pay, no recognition needed, just someone who knew her way around military gear and didn't mind lending a hand when the base was short-staffed. The supply depot was already buzzing when she walked in, Monday morning rush, everyone trying to get their gear squared away before the weekly inspection circus began. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows between stacks of MREs and folded camo netting. The air smelled like cardboard, canvas, and that particular military blend of coffee and disinfectant. She pulled out her clipboard, scanning the list. Size 8 boots, hydration pack, work gloves, duct tape. Simple stuff, nothing fancy, the kind of gear that kept people alive in the field without making headlines back home. Behind the counter, a young private was arguing with his computer terminal, pecking at keys like he was afraid they might bite back. Two specialists near the uniform rack were debating the merits of different boot brands with the intensity of theology students. Normal depot noise. That's when she heard them. 3 second lieutenants stood near the boot rack, fresh out of officer school by the look of their pressed uniforms and shiny bars. They had that particular confidence that comes with new rank and zero real-world experience, the kind of swagger that said they'd read the manuals and figured they had it all figured out. The tall one, name tape reading Mayers, had the build of someone who'd been an athlete in college, probably played lacrosse or rugby, something that required equal parts skill and entitlement. He nudged his buddy with his elbow, not bothering to lower his voice much. Halloween's not for another few months. His buddy Hensley, according to his name tape, was shorter but carried himself like he was still trying to prove something, fresh out of West Point by the look of his posture, probably graduated somewhere in the middle of his class and was still bitter about it. "Look at that jacket," he whispered, but loud enough to be heard 3 aisles over. "Goodwill special, you think?" "Nah," said the third one, a lieutenant named Torres who had the kind of nervous energy that suggested he talked too much when he was uncomfortable. She probably found it in her grandfather's attic. You know how these people are, put on some old uniform and suddenly they're war heroes. They were loud enough to be heard, but quiet enough to pretend they weren't talking about her. Classic officer move, the kind they probably learned in leadership school somewhere between how to read a map and why you're better than enlisted personnel. "Some people just can't let go," Maya said, shaking his head with theatrical sympathy. "Probably tells war stories at the VFW about missions that never happened, secret operations in countries that don't exist." "I bet she's got a whole closet full of stuff like that," Torres added, warming to the theme. "Fake ribbons, made-up patches, the whole stolen Valor starter pack." They were enjoying themselves now, feeding off each other's confidence like sharks smelling blood in the water. This was safe territory for them, punching down at someone who couldn't punch back. Lena kept walking, grabbed what she needed from the shelves, and headed for the checkout counter. Her movements were economical, practiced. No wasted motion, no reaction to the commentary floating behind her. The private behind the register looked barely old enough to shave, probably straight out of basic training by the nervous way he handled the scanner. His name tape read Collins, and he had that deer-in-headlights look that new soldiers get when they're not sure what the rules are. "Morning, he said, trying to sound professional. "Got your paperwork?" He scanned her authorization form, then frowned at his screen like it had personally offended him. System says you need active duty clearance or assigned unit code." Lena reached into her bag and pulled out the authorization letter. 3 pages, properly formatted, signed by a battalion logistics officer with enough stamps and seals to choke a bureaucrat. Everything official and above board. The kid read it twice, turned it over like the answer might be written on the back, then tapped his screen again with increasing desperation. Still showing manual approval required. "The system won't let me override it. I might need to get my supervisor, but his at morning briefing." His voice trailed off uncertainly. You could see him trying to figure out whether following regulations or helping a customer was going to get him in more trouble. That's when Lieutenant Myers decided to be helpful. He strolled over with that practiced grin officers use when they think they've caught someone in a lie, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes and says he's doing everyone a favor by exposing fraud. "Let me take a look at that," he said, reaching for the paperwork with the casual authority of someone who'd never been told no. He made a show of examining it, holding it up to the light like he was checking for watermarks. Pretty convincing, but see, here's the thing, we get people trying this all the time. Fake authorization letters, expired waivers, you name it. Anyone with a computer and a decent printer can make something that looks official. The private shifted uncomfortably, caught between regulations and rank, procedure and pressure. His eyes darted between Lena and the lieutenant like he was watching a tennis match where someone was about to get hurt. He said reluctantly. "You might need to come back once it's been cleared through the battalion office. They're usually open after 0900. Lena nodded once, no argument, no explanation, no dramatic protest about disrespect or proper procedures. She simply stepped aside and sat down on the metal bench against the back wall, setting her gear list on her knee like she had all the time in the world. The bench was one of those institutional pieces that managed to be uncomfortable in every possible way, Cold metal that conducted every degree of the depot's aggressive air conditioning straight through her jacket. But she'd sat in worse places and waited for better reasons. As she settled in, one of the other lieutenants walked past slowly, making sure his voice carried. Maybe try a uniform that actually fits next time. There are regulations about proper appearance, even for civilians. He didn't wait for a response, didn't need one. This wasn't about conversation or correction. This was about establishing a pecking order, making sure everyone knew where they stood. Lena kept her eyes forward. The depot continued its morning business around her. A forklift beeped somewhere in the back. Someone was arguing about a missing shipment of batteries. The coffee machine by the entrance gurgled and hissed like it was personally offended by Monday morning. Her shoulder ached where old shrapnel had carved a permanent reminder into muscle and bone, the kind of ache that weather brought out, that stress made worse, that would never quite go away no matter how much physical therapy they threw at it. She adjusted her bag, and for just a moment, her jacket shifted enough to show the faded outline of something on her left shoulder. Not much left of it, just ghost threads and fabric shadows where a patch used to be. The kind of wear that comes from years of washing and wearing, from sun and rain and sand that gets into everything. But it wasn't any patch you'd find in a uniform catalog or military surplus store. A civilian contractor rolling ammunition crates on a hand truck stopped mid-stride when he caught sight of it. His eyes went wide for just a second, like he'd seen something that shouldn't exist. Then he turned and disappeared into the back storage room without a word, moving faster than his job required. Lena barely noticed. She was used to waiting. Near the vending machines, the lieutenants had found themselves an audience. 2 other junior officers and a supply warrant gathered around as Lieutenant Hensley held court. One boot propped up against a chair like he was giving a TED talk about military fashion disasters. I'm telling you, they crawl out of every military documentary on cable. Probably thinks she's starring in her own war movie, he said, gesturing with his energy drink for emphasis. Chuckles all around, safe, comfortable laughter from people who knew their rank protected them, who never had to earn respect the hard way. You see that patch? Mayers added, warming to his theme. So faded you can't even tell what it used to be. Bet she's got stories about classified missions nobody can verify, top-secret operations in countries that don't exist. The warrant officer, a guy named Patterson, who'd been around long enough to know better, shook his head with theatrical sympathy. They always flash a scar and wait for someone to buy them a beer. That patch doesn't even show up on Google. Probably made it herself in arts and crafts. The best part, Hensley continued, is how they never give you details. It's always classified or need to know or my personal favorite. If I told you I'd have to kill you. Because who's going to challenge that? Just sit there looking mysterious and let people fill in the blanks. More laughter, the kind that comes easy when you're punching down at someone who won't punch back. I had a guy in my rock class who pulled the same thing, Patterson said. Claimed his dad was special forces, showed up to military ball wearing ribbons that didn't exist. Turns out the old man was motor pool. They always count on the silence. As they she, are. Hensley said, really getting into it now, because confronting them makes you look like the bad guy, so they just sit there with their fake patches and made-up stories, waiting for someone to thank them for their service. That's when someone set down a coffee tray behind them with just enough force to make the ceramic mugs clink together. 4 cups, military issue, steam rising in the depot's recycled air. Nobody had heard him coming. The man standing there wore the kind of stillness that made smart people stop talking and dumb people keep going. Combat-seasoned OCPs that had seen real use, not parade ground pressing. Sleeves rolled to show faded tattoos that told stories these kids had only read about. A Pathfinder arrowhead on one forearm, airborne wings on the other, deployment bands that went up his arm like a timeline of places most people couldn't find on a map. His name tape read REE in faded black letters. The one below it read Brig Gen. The laughter died like someone had cut the power to the whole conversation. Brigadier General Malcolm Ree didn't acknowledge them, didn't explain himself, didn't offer any of the pleasantries that usually came with rank. He simply picked up a 5th cup of coffee, black and untouched, and walked away without a word, headed straight for the woman on the bench. Jesus, Hensley whispered, his voice barely audible. Was that Ree? Mayers confirmed, his mouth suddenly tasting like sand. Malcolm Ree, from the Pathfinder teams. He briefed the Joint Chiefs last month. The guy who pulled that convoy out of Fallujah? Patterson asked, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. That's him, Mayers said, watching the general's back as he walked away with purpose. If he heard us. But the general was already across the depot, each step measured and deliberate, headed directly for Lena Trujillo like he'd been looking for her all morning. She hadn't moved from the bench, but something in her posture had changed, not tense exactly, more like someone who'd heard a frequency only they could recognize, felt a gravitational pull that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with shared history. General Ree stopped a few feet behind her, close enough that his shadow fell across her shoulders. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent decades making decisions that mattered, decisions that saved lives or ended them. That patch on your shoulder. The words hung in the air like a challenge, not aggressive but loaded with meaning that went beyond simple curiosity. Lena didn't turn around, didn't react, except for the slight straightening of her spine, the way a soldier responds to a voice of authority, even after years away from formation. Where'd you serve? With the 519th Echo. His tone had shifted now, not challenging, but personal, like someone opening a door they'd kept locked for years, dusting off memories that weren't supposed to exist. She answered quietly, still facing forward, her voice carrying the kind of certainty that comes from lived experience. Started with them during Black June. Finished on Crimson Ridge. The words meant nothing to the lieutenant still frozen by the vending machines. They were just names, operation codes that might as well have been random letters and numbers. But to General Ree, they were coordinates on a map drawn in blood and sand. His jaw tightened. The depot around them continued its morning rhythm, but something had changed in the space between these two people. A recognition was taking place, the kind that happened when ghosts suddenly became real. He stepped around to face her now, looking directly at the ghost outline of a unit patch that barely existed anymore. Just threads and shadows, fabric worn so thin it was more memory than a marking, but enough for someone who knew what to look for. Echo Response didn't have a public roster, he said, his voice dropping to something almost reverent. Most people think it never existed. Hell, most people in the Pentagon think it never existed. Lena met his eyes for the first time, dark, steady, measuring him the way someone measures distance to a target. It existed for 7 years, she said simply. Then half of us got folded into phantom units. The rest were debriefed into silence. A pause stretched between them, not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that speaks volumes, that carries the weight of shared understanding between people who'd seen things that didn't make it into official reports. Behind them, the depot had gone unnaturally quiet. Conversations had died mid-sentence. Even the forklift in the back had stopped beeping. Crimson Ridge, Ree said, almost to himself. October 2011. We called it Operation Ghostwalker in the public files. That wasn't the real name, Lena replied. No, it wasn't. Then Ree turned sharply, his voice cutting across the depot like a blade through silence. I need whoever's in charge of this facility, now. The private behind the counter fumbled his scanner so badly it clattered to the floor. The lieutenants stood straighter than they had all morning, suddenly very interested in the floor tiles. One of them whispered, Echo Response. But nobody answered, because the air itself felt heavy with the weight of something they didn't understand. A sergeant major emerged from the back office, moving like someone who'd heard that tone before and knew it meant business. He was built like a tree trunk, with the kind of bearing that said he'd been doing this job since before these lieutenants were born. General Ree didn't waste time on pleasantries or military courtesy. Sergeant Major, this is Sergeant First Class Lena Trujillo. She served with the 519th Echo Response Group under Joint Task Command Structure Operations Crimson Ridge and Black June. The sergeant major's eyes immediately dropped to Lena's shoulder, studying the faded patch outline like he was trying to read hieroglyphics. Something shifted in his expression, not recognition of her, but of something he'd only heard whispered about in classified briefings, something that existed in redacted files and stories that were never supposed to be told. That unit ran triple black protocol, Ree continued, his voice carrying across the now silent depot. Minimal records, zero press coverage, complete operational deniability. But I know it existed because on October 15, 2011, on Crimson Ridge outside Kandahar, when my convoy lost air support and got pinned down in a killbox, Echo ran interference through the lower ravine. The general's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something personal. We were carrying wounded from an IED strike. 3 vehicles, 57 personnel. No extraction possible. The Taliban had us boxed in from high ground on 3 sides. We were taking sustained fire and running out of ammunition. He looked directly at Lena. Echo response went in without air cover, without backup, without official authorization. They drew fire away from our position. Gave us the opening we needed to break contact and reach the landing zone. The sergeant major straightened. Understood, sir. She's owed full respect and full cooperation. If she needs gear, we provide it. No forms, no waiting, no questions. That's a direct order from a flag officer. Yes, sir. Then, addressing the entire depot, consider this a standing directive. He didn't shout, didn't posture, just spoke with the quiet authority of someone who'd earned the right to be heard. One of the lieutenants muttered under his breath. She was one of them. For the first time that morning, nobody laughed. Lena had remained quiet through it all, but there was something different about her now, not vindicated exactly, more like someone who'd been carrying weight for a long time and felt one strap loosen. General Rhee walked her back to the front counter himself. The same private who'd earlier shrugged at the system's approval requirements now stood rigid, treating his terminal like it might explode if he touched the wrong key. Private, this requisition will be fulfilled immediately. Yes, sir, the young man stammered, fingers flying across the keyboard. He didn't look up, didn't ask for additional authorization, just scanned Lena's ID and started hitting override codes while his ears turned red. You're all set, Everything's approved. An aide hustled to the back and returned with a sealed gear pack. New boots, hydration system, gloves, all regulation, all properly issued. He set the gear on the counter beside her. You're good to go. Appreciate it, General, she said quietly. Not doing you a favor, Sergeant. I'm correcting an oversight. That's when Lieutenant Myers approached. The same officer who'd been so confident with his jokes earlier now looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. He stopped a respectful distance away, hands clasped behind his back. He began, eyes lowered. I want to apologize for earlier. I didn't realize. Lena looked at him, not angry but not letting him off easy either. You didn't ask. 2 words that hit harder than any lecture, simple truth that left nowhere to hide. He nodded. Yes, She didn't smile, didn't make it comfortable for him, but she didn't drag it out either. We all come up through something, she said after a moment. Maybe next time, ask first. Yes, he said again, with more weight behind it this time. General Rhee gave Lena one final nod and headed for the exit. The depot's normal buzz resumed behind them, but the energy had completely changed. What started with mockery ended in institutional silence, and for the first time that morning, the old jacket on Lena Trujillo's shoulders felt exactly right. The doors hissed open, and she stepped back into the Georgia heat, gear in hand, boots under one arm, hydration pack over her shoulder. The morning sun had climbed higher now, burning off the last of the dew and promising another scorching day. Behind her, the depot was already rebooting, both digitally and culturally. Word would spread quickly through the base. By evening chow, everyone would know about the woman in the faded jacket who turned out to be a genuine ghost from operations that never officially happened. Halfway across the parking lot, she heard boots crunching on gravel beside hers. General Rhee had fallen into step without announcement, matching her pace like they were back on patrol somewhere that didn't exist on any map. They walked in comfortable silence, 2 veterans in the quiet morning heat, the depot and its lessons fading behind them. At the edge of the lot, near where her truck sat baking in the sun, he stopped. She stopped too. They stood there for a moment, engine heat shimmering off the asphalt around them, the sounds of base life continuing in the distance. He didn't offer some dramatic farewell or thank her again for a mission that happened over a decade ago. Just looked at her with the kind of respect that can't be faked or demanded, only earned through blood and sacrifice. "You know," he said quietly, "there's a training exercise next month. Joint operations. Could use someone with experience running interference ops." Lena considered this, adjusting the strap of her gear bag. "Consulting work. Something like that. If you're interested." She looked back toward the depot, where 3 young officers were probably having the worst morning of their military career so far. "Might be good for them to work with someone who's actually been there," she said. "Might be," he agreed. She gave him another of those small nods, the kind that said more than words. "I'll think about it, General." "Re's just re." She watched him go for half a breath, then headed to her truck, gear in the back seat, windows down, dust rising from the tires as she pulled away. No medals, no ceremony, just dignity restored by someone who understood what it meant. And that was enough. Lena pulled away from the gate, the truck's engine a steady hum beneath her. The depot grew smaller in her rearview mirror, the building shimmering slightly in the rising heat, but it felt somehow more solid now, more real. Something had shifted there. Something important. No one stopped her. No one questioned her right to be there. And the next time someone mentioned Detachment 1375 or Echo Response, it wouldn't be in whispered rumors or classified files. It would be in the respectful silence of people who finally understood what real service looked like. She drove down the gravel road that wound behind the base, past the motor pool and the training fields, and the endless expanse of desert beyond. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the dew and promising another scorching day. She passed a cluster of young recruits near the barracks, still talking about the woman who'd made their best pace look effortless. Dana drove with the windows down and the radio playing softly, carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd reminded the world that recognition wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned, one quiet moment at a time. Somewhere on the highway, heading home, she considered the general's offer. Consulting work. Being back on a base, even just for a training exercise. It wouldn't be the same, nothing ever was. But maybe, just maybe, it was a different kind of purpose. A way to share the lessons learned in places that didn't make the news, to show the next generation what quiet strength looked like. What it meant to serve without needing recognition. What it cost to carry that weight, and why it was worth carrying anyway. She thought about the young private at the counter, the lieutenants in their pressed uniforms. They were going to face things out there that the manuals didn't cover. Times when the chain of command broke down, when the mission went sideways, when good people were depending on them to make impossible choices. Her voice, if she chose to use it, could remind them that quiet strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the one still standing when the noise stops. The truck flowed onto the main highway, the desert stretching out on either side. In the vastness, Lena felt the quiet certainty of her own place. No medals, no ceremonies, just dignity restored. And that was enough.